Good morning. This is Pastor Steve Mapp, and I am so glad that you've taken some time this morning to share this devotional with me. Lately, in our Sunday school class that meets on Sundays, we've been studying briefly the birth narratives, along with some other things. The birth narratives of Jesus that are found in Matthew and Luke, and it's been a fascinating little study, and so I've been kind of looking through some things there. And this morning I happened to be reading in the first chapter of Luke, and this fascinating story of the birth of John the Baptist, who of course is going to lead the way, if you will, for Jesus. He's going to prepare the way. He's going to let, in all four Gospels, talk about the importance of John as the one who comes before the Lord and prepares the way for him and announces his coming. And it's a great story. And so this morning I was reading about John's birth narrative, and there's a fascinating passage in Luke 1:14. I'd like to read it to you. But the angel said to him, this is Zechariah, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John." It's a fascinating passage that, because if we begin to look at just this one passage, in it a prophecy is revealed. It's pretty amazing. John in Hebrew is the word Yochanan, and it means Jehovah has graced. That's what that word means. Jehovah has graced. Jehovah is gracious. And then if we just think about Zechariah's parents, Elizabeth and Zechariah, the backdrop to this story is that they're both old. They're both from priestly families. Zechariah is serving as a priest, and it just so happens that in his time in the temple where he's preparing in the Holy of Holies, an angel comes to visit him, and that's when this verse shows up in Luke's Gospel. But if you think about Zechariah and you do a little research on what his name meant, Zechariah, it meant Jehovah remembers. Jehovah remembers. And then, of course, Zechariah is joined in marriage to Elizabeth. In Hebrew, Elizabeth is pronounced Elisheva, and the word means God has promised. God is an oath. And if you think about that just for a second, Zechariah, God remembers. Elizabeth, God has promised. God remembers his promise. And out of that promise is born the message, if you will, that God is gracious. God's a gracious giver. And that's the news that John the Baptist is going to announce. That this Jesus, God's only Son, is coming into the world. God's promise of salvation has arrived, and John is the deliverer of that message. It's fascinating in two senses. One, that no matter where we are in our lives, you think in terms of Zechariah and Elizabeth, they're old, they haven't had children, but yet even in that state, God remembers and delivers grace to them in the form of their son, John. And I think it serves to remind us all that no matter where we are in our lives, God never forgets us. He never leaves us. And then this whole message to the world about Jesus, and he is grace and truth. And I think it's just fascinating that here in this one passage is prophecy fulfilled. Zechariah, Elizabeth, John tells the message. God remembers. God remembers his promise. God is gracious. And so he is. And as I got to thinking about that, I thought about this verse that comes from John's Gospel this morning that is a wonderful one for us to remember. In John's prologue, if you will, to his Gospel, chapter 1, he says this, John 1:14, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. God is the gracious giver, the most gracious giver we could ever imagine, and giving us his only Son, our salvation. And as I thought about this morning, I thought about, you and I as Christians, when we choose to follow Christ, in essence, we make a promise. We're promising God that we are going to follow his Son, and we're going to become disciples. We're going to learn about his Son. We're going to try to be imitators, if you will, of his Son. We, in one sense, make a promise or an oath. And I got to thinking about that. When you and I live into that oath, when we live into that promise to be followers of Jesus, well, in so many ways, our lives begin to reflect grace, our ability to forgive, our ability to walk in humbleness, our ability to do everything rightly in the way we know that God would have us live. Our decisions, everything that we do should be in an effort to follow Jesus' example. And so in a sense, when we are following our promise, we live lives of grace. I just thought that was a really neat connection. God remembers his promise. God is the gracious giver. And when we remember our promise, we too can give our lives graciously to others. Thank you this morning for joining us for this devotional. I do pray that you're safe, and I do pray God's blessing on you. Have a great day.